Hi, SLOCon. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Michael Ericksen. I currently work as a site reliability engineer at Intelligent Medical Objects, headquartered near Chicago. And today I'm going to share with you some lessons I've learned about reliability, about service level objectives, all from the back of a bicycle. So as some background for this talk today, it's going to reference both the COVID-19 pandemic and global climate change. So if either of those two hot topics feel too heavy for you today, there's plenty of other amazing content at this conference for you to check out instead. Now, the story about reliability lessons in bicycles starts with a family trip we took in early March 2020 to the Monterey Peninsula, just as the US was starting to take its COVID response more seriously. And so one day, instead of going to the aquarium, the indoor aquarium, as we originally had planned, we instead rented some bicycles and took a scenic tour of the area. And you can see sort of that gorgeous backdrop behind me. I'm the rider in the photo with my two passengers behind me. And one important detail about the specific bicycle that I'm riding is that it's my first time riding a bicycle with electric assist. So you pedal, the bike helps. Absolutely game-changing for me. And what this meant was that it was a relatively easy ride in spite of some fairly challenging ride conditions. Hilly terrain, stiff headwinds, and those two passengers I mentioned earlier. A fairly easy ride to complete. If it sounds like I'm about to say, and I walked uphill to school in snow both ways, well, we're going to talk about snow a bit later on too. The other background for this talk I alluded to earlier is the scientific consensus around anthropogenic climate change. That is, that human activities are the primary cause of climate warming trends. Hope is not a strategy. This is a quotation from early in the Google SRE book, an ancient SRE saying, and it's a quotation that feels as applicable to global climate change as it does to the technical systems that many of us operate. And I think there's some interesting tension between this idea that hope is not a strategy and hope is a discipline, a quotation from the organizer Miriam Kaba. And part of the way that I understand her words is that hope is something that we choose to practice on a day-to-day basis. It's our actions, it's our choices, it's the communities that we form and participate in to shape different outcomes that we are perhaps moving towards. And so we returned home from vacation into a pandemic, and one of the really revealing statistics I heard right around this time was that more than 60% of vehicle trips are less than 5 miles in distance, as well as the fact that vehicles account for more than 51% of household emissions. And at least for us at that time, the primary way that we moved about was by our vehicle, regardless of whether that trip was a mile away to the grocery store or longer distances. And to get a sense of that scale for what 5 miles is, I've shown a 5-mile radius from a center point in Chicago, right near where this photo was taken at the Garfield Park Conservatory, a beautiful space if you're ever in the area to visit. And it's quite a large area. It was a really compelling argument to me for why we might consider purchasing this bicycle. It's about 35 blocks in any direction. And so for my family, what this meant was that trips like school drop-offs, ballet classes, swim lessons, dentist and doctor appointments, hardware stores, grocery stores, and the Target Corporation were all within that 5-mile radius and much closer to that 1 to 2 mile radius, where there's a lot of research to suggest that folks are willing to shift their transportation modalities away from vehicles. There's even more evidence to suggest that with an electric bicycle, folks are willing to extend that range a little bit further. And it's part of what I'm going to talk about today. So service level indicators, service level objectives, two technical tools that I use in my professional life. Also felt like they were very relevant to these kind of mundane day-to-day decisions, like how do we get from point A to point B? So let's get into service level indicators and service level objectives. What are they and how did we use them, and what makes a good one? So this is the initial service level indicator that I selected. A trip less than 5 miles is completed by bicycle, with an asterisk for some exclusions that I'll talk about. And I want to use this to sort of illustrate some ideas about what makes a good service level indicator. So the first is that it should be easy to understand and explain. And I think with this one, I could probably sit down with most of you and explain what is meant by this and what we hope to accomplish in a few minutes or less. The second criteria I use is that the statement should yield a true or false outcome. Some other literature uses good and bad outcomes, and if we look at the statement, we can confirm that it matches those criteria, right? A trip less than 5 miles is completed by bicycle. That's true or good. If we make that same trip using a car, that would be false or bad. And then the exclusions is, at least for this initial iteration, we did not intend to use the bicycle for transportation from the months of November to April, when weather in the Chicago area doesn't always cooperate. So that's our service level indicator. And then the next level of the reliability stack is the service level objective. And that defines the target ratio of those good events that we defined in our service level indicator to the pool of total events. One criteria that is important when defining your service level objectives is that they should be based in reality. They're not wishful thinking, to go back to that hope is not a strategy sentiment from earlier. And this one is based on the reality of our most frequent family car trips, which is taking our kids to school. So what this approximately means is that 4 out of 5 days of the week, we're going to use the bicycle instead of the car to take kids to school, and that felt very doable. It gives us some latitude in terms of inclement weather. If the bicycle is at the shop or has a flat, it's not required that we use the bicycle. 100% isn't the goal, but we still saw a very meaningful way to reduce some of our household emissions by converting local trips to use a bicycle instead of a car. The other thing about service level objectives is that they should be specific to your organizational context. Even your organizational team, you can't necessarily pick up the service level objective for a service that another team is running, maybe 99.99% available, and drop it into your service, because there's likely different constraints on your system. And I think that's true for this one as well. Things like where you live, your proximity to childcare, a flexible work schedule, safe bicycle infrastructure, all those things might inform how you choose to identify those service level objectives, as well as the service level indicator. So we operated using the single service level indicator and objective for about a year. I think that's another really good criteria for your service level objectives, is that there shouldn't be a lot of them. A handful is probably good. But we were motivated by a second school drop-off with worse parking to remove those seasonal restrictions from our service level indicator. Iterate over everything. The world will change. It's all about humans. And I was pleasantly surprised with how nicely those guiding principles from the book, Implementing Service Level Objectives, fit with the theme of my conference talk. But I didn't really have any experience running this local trip service under new operating conditions. So I reached out to the owner of the shop where I bought my bike to see if she had any recommendations, either in terms of equipment or maintenance. And you can see one of her recommendations here in the image. It's those bar mitts that go over the handlebars to keep my hands nice and toasty when we're out riding in the winter. The other is some metal studded snow tires that help to minimize slipping. And then a third one that we learned along the way was sticking to more major plowed roads when there's fresh snow accumulation. Those tend to be plowed a little bit sooner here, and so they're more safer when there's fresh snow on the ground. But with those 3 minor adjustments, we have been able to continue to satisfy our service level objective that 80% of trips under 5 miles are made by bicycle all year round. And if you are a parent and have ever had to deal with school drop-off queues, it certainly made me a much happier human to be able to do those trips by bicycle instead of vehicle. I want to focus on user happiness briefly as I conclude, since it's one of the reported benefits or potential benefits of using service level objectives in your organization. A happier business, happier engineers, happier users. And I think this is important to conclude with, especially since this story started with the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the considerable consequences of that pandemic, aside from human illness and death, has been the increased social isolation that many of us have felt and continue to feel as we work to keep each other safe. One of my earliest observations from riding a bicycle instead of making those same trips by car is how much more social it felt. It was things like corking an intersection so that a pedestrian with mobility issues had ample time to safely cross, or chatting with someone who was waiting for their bus while I was waiting for the light to change. It's also not uncommon for cars to roll down their window and ask questions like, hey, is that an electric bike? And hey, is that fun to ride? And the answers are yes and absolutely. And those are social interactions that just don't tend to happen when I am in a vehicle. Hope is not a strategy. Hope is a discipline. Hope is the thing with feathers, or as we like to say around here, let's ride, y'all. Thank you so much. I will be available in the conference Slack to answer and chat asynchronously. I'm also available on Twitter at Ericksen, ERICKSO, like the Norwegian spelling of my last name, _E, like the Danish spelling of my last name, _N. And I'll share some resources on my Twitter feed as well. Thank you so much, SLOConf.